I thought my girlfriend's eco-activist friend was just passionate about saving the planet, until I found a hidden ledger detailing how their protests were a cover for something far more sinister. My relationship with Dana had been, for the most part, a dream. We met at a book club discussion on dystopian fiction, and our connection was immediate. She was sharp, witty, and possessed a fiery passion for causes she believed in. One of those passions, environmentalism, was a significant part of her life, largely influenced by her childhood friend, Thomas. I'd known about Thomas from the beginning. Dana spoke of him with a fondness reserved for family. They'd grown up next door to each other, been each other's first prom dates, strictly as friends, and had remained inseparable ever since. Thomas was a leader of a local environmental group called Viridian Shield, known for organizing peaceful protests, community cleanups, and lobbying local businesses to adopt greener practices. Dana was his most dedicated lieutenant. At first, I admired their commitment. Thomas was intense, with a piercing gaze that seemed to look right through you. He was charismatic in a quiet, serious way, able to command a room without raising his voice. When he spoke about the impending climate crisis, his words carried a weight that made you feel guilty for using a plastic straw. Initially, I found his intensity compelling, but soon I started to feel a subtle undercurrent of something else, a possessiveness over Dana that went beyond typical friendship. He'd make comments that, on the surface, sounded innocuous but felt like subtle jabs. For example, when I mentioned I had driven to a hiking trail, he sighed and said, "It's a shame Dana's dating someone still so reliant on fossil fuels." I thought she had higher standards. Dana would just laugh it off, punching his arm playfully. "Oh, stop it, Tom. Not everyone can bike 20 miles to work like you." But the comment would linger, making me feel inadequate. The real shift started about 4 months into our relationship. Viridian Shield began targeting a new development project on the outskirts of town, Northwood Commons, a mixed-use complex that promised jobs but required clearing a large, wooded area. Thomas was vehemently opposed, calling it an ecological massacre. The protests escalated from holding signs outside the mayor's office to more disruptive actions. They began staging sit-ins at the construction site, leading to arrests. Dana, swept up in the cause, was there for all of it. Our time together began to shrink. Date nights were canceled for emergency strategy sessions. Weekend trips were postponed for protests. When we were together, her phone buzzed constantly with messages from the Viridian Shield group chat, always spearheaded by Thomas. If I expressed frustration, she'd look at me with disappointed eyes. "This is important, Mark. This is about the future of our community. I thought you understood that." I tried to understand. I even attended a few protests to show support. But the atmosphere there was different. It wasn't just passionate. It was militant. Thomas's speeches had taken on a darker tone, speaking less about preservation and more about holding the corrupt accountable and making them pay for their destruction. His followers, mostly idealistic young people like Dana, hung on his every word. They viewed him not just as a leader, but as a prophet. The first major red flag appeared after a particularly chaotic protest where equipment at the Northwood site was vandalized overnight. Graffiti reading, "Shield was here," was spray painted on bulldozers, and several tires were slashed. It made the local news. The construction company blamed Viridian Shield, but Thomas publicly condemned the vandalism, calling it a false flag operation designed to discredit their peaceful movement. I remember watching the press conference on TV. He was convincing, his face a mask of righteous indignation. But Dana, sitting next to me, was unusually quiet. Later that night, I saw her scrolling through photos on her phone. She quickly closed the app when I walked in, but not before I caught a glimpse of a picture taken in the dark. It was a close-up of shredded tractor tires, and in the corner of the shot, a hand holding a utility knife. On the wrist was a distinctive leather bracelet with a green stone, exactly like the one Thomas always wore. My blood ran cold. "Dana," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "What was that picture?" She flushed. "Nothing. Just something from the group chat. People are pissed about the accusations." It looked like evidence of the vandalism. I pressed. "And that bracelet. It's not what you think." She snapped, her defensiveness immediate. "Thomas would never. Someone is framing us. He told us to document anything suspicious." Her explanation was rushed, panicked. It felt like a lie. I decided to dig deeper. Under the guise of wanting to be more involved, I started attending more Viridian Shield meetings. Thomas was initially wary, but Dana's insistence won him over. The meetings were held in a rented community hall, filled with maps, blueprints, and lists of companies affiliated with the Northwood Project. One evening, I arrived early and found Thomas alone, meticulously going through a spreadsheet on his laptop. When he saw me, he slammed the lid shut, just going over donation records. He said, his smile not reaching his eyes. The pieces were starting to form a disturbing picture. The peaceful group was clearly involved in the vandalism. But why would Thomas lie? To protect the group's image? It felt like there was more to it. The breaking point came when Dana canceled our anniversary dinner. A critical action was planned for that night. She wouldn't give me details, citing security. "The less you know, the safer you are," she said, a phrase that sounded like it came directly from Thomas. That night, a fire broke out in the site manager's office at Northwood Commons. It was quickly contained, but it was arson. The police found Viridian Shield pamphlets at the scene. This was no longer simple vandalism. It was a serious crime. I was terrified for Dana. I drove to her apartment, but she wasn't there. I called her phone repeatedly, only getting her voicemail. Frantic, I did the only thing I could think of. I went to Thomas's house, a small cabin on the edge of the very woods they were protesting to save. His truck was gone, but on a hunch, I checked the shed behind the cabin. The lock was flimsy. Inside, amidst gardening tools and camping gear, was a metal lockbox. It was heavy. Using a crowbar I found nearby, I pried it open. What I found inside wasn't evidence of eco-terrorism. It was something that made my mind reel. There was no manifesto, no protest plans. Instead, the box was filled with financial documents. There were bank statements for an offshore account I'd never heard of, made out to a shell company. There were copies of contracts and wire transfer receipts. And then I found the ledger. It was a simple black-bound notebook, but its contents were explosive. It detailed payments. Large, regular payments from a numbered company. Next to each payment was a code. D1, site delay. D2, equipment damage. D3, media attention. There were dates and amounts corresponding perfectly with each protest and act of vandalism. The final entry, for some 5 times larger than any previous payment, was labeled Final Project Halt. The date was set for next week. This wasn't activism. It was a racket. Thomas wasn't trying to stop the Northwood Commons project. He was being paid by a rival developer to sabotage it, using his activist group as a perfect cover. He was manipulating Dana and all those idealistic kids, putting their futures and lives at risk, all for a profit. The Viridian Shield was a sham. I heard a car door slam outside. I quickly took photos of every page in the ledger with my phone, replaced the box, and slipped out of the shed just as Thomas's headlights swept across the driveway. I hid in the tree line, my heart pounding. I saw Thomas get out, but he wasn't alone. Dana was with him. They were talking intently, and as they reached his front door, he put his arm around her. She didn't pull away. I felt sick. Did she know? Was she a part of this? The next day, Dana finally returned my calls. She sounded exhausted but exhilarated. You wouldn't believe the pressure, we're putting on them, Mark. The fire was a tragedy, but it's shining a light on their corruption. Dana, we need to talk, I said, my voice tight. It's about Thomas. She sighed. Not this again. Mark, I'm tired of your jealousy. Thomas is a good man. He's dedicated. Last night, he helped me see things more clearly. What things? About what really matters. About being with someone who shares your core values completely. The conversation was a dead end. She was in too deep. I couldn't just show her the photos. If she was involved, she might warn Thomas. I had to go to the authorities. But with Thomas's girlfriend, Brenda, in the picture, I had another option. I remembered Dana mentioning that Brenda, who was also a member of Iridian Shield, had been acting strangely lately, asking uncomfortable questions. Maybe she had suspicions of her own. Tracking Brenda down was easy. I found her after a shift at the coffee shop where she worked. She was wary of me at first, but when I mentioned Thomas's name, her expression hardened. I know something's wrong, I said. I think Thomas is using the group for something else. Brenda looked around nervously. Meet me tonight. The park by the river. 8 o'clock. That evening, she was waiting on a bench, looking anxious. I showed her the photos of the ledger on my phone. Her face went pale as she scrolled through them. I knew it, she whispered, her voice trembling. I knew the money was wrong. He said it was donations from anonymous benefactors, but the amounts, they were too big. She told me that Thomas had become secretive, buying expensive gear for his activism that never seemed to be used, talking on encrypted apps late at night. I confronted him last week. He said I was being paranoid, that the cause required resources. He said if I couldn't trust him, I should leave. She looked at me, her eyes full of fear. Dana, does she know? I don't think so, I said, though I was no longer sure. I think she's just another pawn in his game. We have to go to the police. Brenda agreed. We went to the police station together and handed over the evidence. The detective who took our statement was initially skeptical, but the detailed ledger and the correlation with the Northwood incidents got his attention. He said they would open an investigation, but warned us not to do anything reckless. 2 days passed in a tense silence. Dana was barely speaking to me, fully immersed in the final push against Northwood. Then I got a call from Brenda. She was hysterical. He knows, Mark. Thomas knows someone was in his shed. He's tearing the house apart. He accused me, but I denied it. He's crazy. I'm scared. Did he mention the ledger? No, but he's paranoid. He's moving something up. The final action. It's happening tonight. He's gathered the inner circle at the cabin. Dana's there. I knew what the final action was. According to the ledger, it was Project Halt. A payment that large could only mean one thing, something catastrophic. Another fire? Something worse? I couldn't wait for the police. I had to go there. I drove to Thomas's cabin, my mind racing with scenarios. The clearing in front of the cabin was filled with cars. Through the windows, I could see about a dozen people inside, including Dana, listening intently as Thomas spoke, pointing to a large map on the wall. His voice was low but fervent. I texted Dana, "I'm outside. You need to get out of there now. Thomas is not who you think he is. It's all a fraud." A moment later, I saw her look at her phone. A frown crossed her face. She showed it to Thomas. His head snapped up, and his eyes scanned the darkness, directly toward where my car was parked. He said something to the group, and they all stood up, their faces a mixture of confusion and determination. This was bad. I started my car, ready to drive to the nearest police station. But then my phone rang. It was Dana. "Mark, what are you doing?" she hissed. "Are you spying on us?" "Dana, listen to me. Thomas is being paid to sabotage the Northwood project. He has a ledger. I've seen it. He's using you. There was a pause. I could hear Thomas's voice in the background. Don't listen to him. Dana, he's trying to divide us. He's scared of your power. Mark, just go, Dana said, her voice cold. You don't understand what we're trying to build here. Build? Dana, he's a criminal. The police are involved. The line went dead. At that moment, the cabin door flew open and Thomas strode out, followed by the rest of the group. They fanned out, surrounding my car. Their expressions were no longer idealistic. They were fanatical. Dana stood just behind Thomas, her arms crossed, looking at me with a mixture of pity and disdain. Thomas knocked on my window. I rolled it down a crack. You need to leave, Mark, he said calmly. You're trespassing and you're interfering with lawful assembly. This isn't lawful, Thomas. I know about the payments. The ledger, it's over. A flicker of panic crossed his face, but it was quickly replaced by a smug smile. Ledger? What ledger? You have an active imagination. He leaned closer. Dana has made her choice. She chooses a future. She chooses a family that fights for what's right. You're just part of the problem she's leaving behind. I looked at Dana. Is that true? She stepped forward. Thomas is right. This is bigger than us, Mark. This is about sacrifice. If you can't see that, then yes, we're done. In that moment, any hope I had for her vanished. She was lost. The sound of sirens cut through the night. Red and blue lights flashed through the trees. The police, prompted by my call or Brenda's, had arrived. Chaos erupted. The group scattered into the woods. Thomas tried to run, but two officers tackled him. Dana stood frozen, a look of utter confusion on her face, as an officer approached her. I gave my statement to the police, providing them with the digital copies of the ledger. Thomas was arrested on charges of fraud, conspiracy, incitement, and connection to the arson. Several members of the group were detained for questioning. Dana was released after a few hours, her involvement deemed to be that of an unwitting dupe. She called me the next day, her voice hollow. She said Thomas had confessed to everything in custody. He had been hired by a competing development corporation to ensure Northwood Commons failed, discrediting the genuine environmental opposition in the process. The Viridian Shield was a weapon for corporate espionage and sabotage. He used me, she whispered. He used all of us. Everything I believed in it was a lie. I didn't know what to say. The damage was done. We tried to reconcile for a few weeks, but the trust was irrevocably broken. Every memory was tainted by the shadow of Thomas's manipulation. She had chosen him, his lies, his fanaticism, over me. I couldn't forget the coldness in her eyes that night at the cabin. We ended things quietly, mutually, a funeral for a relationship that had been poisoned from the outside in. I heard through the grapevine that Dana moved away a few months later, trying to escape the scandal. Thomas is awaiting trial. As for me, I'm left with a bitter lesson about the fine line between passion and obsession, and how easily a noble cause can be twisted into a weapon by someone with a hidden agenda. The forest at Northwood Commons was cleared, and the construction began. The project manager told a local reporter that it was a shame things had to happen the way they did. I drive by the site sometimes, watching the skeletons of buildings rise from the earth, a monument to a battle that was never really about the trees at all.